You ever have one of those weeks, where it's just kind of like, if I ever catch that guy Murphy, if you know, you know, right? How many of you have talked about Shabbat, and when you start to get into Shabbat, you're like, okay, so come Monday morning, you're like, oh, only so many more days until Shabbat. And each day you're counting the days to Shabbat. There's nothing wrong with that. We need to do that. But one of the things I want to do today is kind of challenge our mindset a little bit. It's not just about if I could just make it to Shabbat. There's more to it than that. Okay? And so I want to talk to us about a few things today. What is Shabbat, how it's used in Scripture, what it's for, the covenant aspects of it, and considering Shabbat as kind of a festival, because it is. It's a time that the Father has given to us to proclaim His covenant with us. And so we're going to talk about all these things in here today, okay? First off, we're going to look in Matthew 11, 28 to 30. It says, Yeshua, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you what? Rest. And take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. One of the things I want to point out here is Yeshua says he's going to give you rest, absolutely and completely, but yet the idea of, he says, take my yoke upon you, there's still a yoke there, okay? And talking about, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. The burden means, the work involved. It's still there, okay? But we learn to exist with him and what he said he's going to do, we learn to walk with him in that. Okay? It's kind of like when Yeshua said, follow me, he didn't mean, metaphorically. He meant get up and walk with me. So this is what we're learning as we go through the Scriptures. As we examine the Scriptures, as we read through them day by day, week by week, we're learning how to walk with him. We're learning where he is, about his life, about his covenant, about what he desires for us as his people. So we're learning how to live life. Okay? Because when we came to the Father, when we were redeemed, when we were born again, we didn't know how to do this. Did you? You didn't know how to do this. And so it's like when they came out of Mitzrayim, the Father brought them to the mountain to reveal himself to them, to give them his word by his Spirit, to equip them to go into the promise that I've had for you. And that's the idea. See, he sets us free, brought them through the water, brought them to himself, equipped them with his word, with his Spirit, with his presence, so that we can go forward. Too many people, it's like, okay, I'm redeemed, and we get to the mountain, we're like, now what? I'm just going to stay at this mountain forever for the rest of my life. That was never the point. That was never the intention. Because he said, build me a tabernacle that I may go and live among you to go with you. Literally when he says, so that I may dwell among you, literally how that reads is dwell within you. So he says, build a place for me, prepare a place for me so that I can live in you and go with you where I tell you to go. And isn't that what he does with us today? Are you not a place for Yahweh to dwell? You are. And so we carry his presence with us wherever we go. And so we learn to dwell in him as he is dwelling in and through us at the same time. Shabbat is one of these things. We learn how to rest in him. Because a lot of times we try to do all these things. We got these great ideas and we want to do all these great and amazing things, and we just kind of wear ourselves out. Whereas if Yeshua said, come with me and follow me, and it wouldn't be so difficult. Now, I didn't say it's going to be easy now, because there are times life gets hard, right? But we need to learn to walk with him and hear his voice. A lot of times when we're living life and we're trying to learn to hear his voice and he's speaking to us, we got his word, and it's like, read my word, get to know my heart, and we're like, I don't see it. I'm not reading nothing, because we do that to ourselves. Or like, hear my voice. What? Say again? We need to get ourselves out of the way so that we can hear what the Father is saying to us. And that means a part of us has to die. The old man, the old nature, the old ways, these have to go away. And that is only by surrendering it to him. So, what do we think about Shabbat? When we say it's a time for Shabbat, is it just stop working, or is there more to it? I'm going to tell you, there's more to it. Okay? Let's look at this. Isaiah 40:31 says, but they who what? Wait. Those who wait for Adonai will renew their strength. They will soar up like wings as eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not be faint. When it talks about they who wait upon the Lord, it doesn't mean you're sitting in your chair, you got your drink, you're sitting there with your lemonade going, okay, God, I'm waiting for you to do something. Wow me. That's not what it's talking about, okay? The word wait that's used here is the Hebrew word kavah. Kavah, which means initially could be serve. It means hope. This is where we get the word tikva from. Hatikva is the national anthem of Israel. What's hatikva? The hope. So tikva is a word for hope. How about mikvah? You guys know the word mikvah, right? What's the mikvah? It's what we call a baptism. Literally, the mikvah is a gathering together of water, the pooling together of water. So the kavah means to bind together. So those who wait upon the Lord, those who are bound together with him. That's covenant. Those who are joined together with him. So here's the idea. When we're bound together with him in covenant, it should be a place of refreshing. It should be a place of joy. And sometimes we make it harder than it needs to be. So we need to learn when to kind of push and give the extra and kind of push through some things. But we also need to learn when to just trust Yahweh. Because a lot of times we try to make things happen when Yahweh says it's going to happen in my time. So we need to trust him in the midst of all this, okay? All right, so Shabbat. Is Shabbat just cease from work? Just stop working, is that it? No, it's not. There's more to it than that. If we talk about the very beginning of creation, when Yahweh created everything, did he get just so daggone tired that he just had to take a break? Good answer. No. And literally the word Shabbat means to cease. To cease. So that's what we're talking about. Shabbat, it means an intermission of something. What's an intermission? It means something stops, something ceases, right? So it's a repose, but also to celebrate or make to rest, something that's emotion brought to rest. So we could read when Yahweh's creating everything, he was creating everything, and then there's a point where he stopped creating. He ceased creating. Then what did he do? Then he enjoyed everything that he created. Make sense? So he created everything, then he rested and enjoyed time with that which he created, namely Adam, creation itself. Think about this. The very first full day Adam experienced would have been Shabbat. Man was created on what day? The sixth day. Well, if he was created on the sixth day, he didn't experience the beginning of the sixth day, did he? No. So we have the sixth day, and the sixth day ends, and the seventh day comes, and so the seventh day, Shabbat, would have been the first full day that Adam experienced with Yahweh. What a great time. So this is Shabbat. This is what we're looking at. So if we're kind of defining things, setting this out, we know at the beginning of creation of everything, but when is it reiterated? A lot of people say, oh, so Shabbat, and the covenant to the Jewish people and Mount Sinai and everything like that. Guys, Shabbat precedes Mount Sinai by quite a lot, actually. Seventh day of creation, Shabbat. So when it's reiterated to Israel, it was in a place of covenant. He did not give the people Shabbat to say, this is something new I'm giving you. He was reminding them of what it was created for. And so this is how we're learning to walk with it. So if we go to Leviticus 23, we're talking about the Moedim, right? And when you say, so what are the appointed times? What are the Moedim? What are the festivals of Yahweh? Everybody starts with Passover, right? But before we even get to Passover, there's Shabbat. And we need to have an idea of what is Shabbat to understand a lot of the Moedim, because a lot of the Moedim include a Shabbat. So let's help define this. So Leviticus 23. Verses 1 and 2. So Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, concerning the feasts of whom? The Lord. Concerning the feasts of Yahweh, which you are to proclaim to be holy convocations, these are, what's the next word? My feasts. So are they Jewish feasts? No. They're Yahweh's feasts. And as a covenant people, the Jewish people observe it, but Yahweh says, these are my feasts. See? And he wants us to have that place of fellowship with him in them. Okay, so what are the appointed times of Yahweh? What's the word for appointed times? Moed. Moed is an appointed time. What is a moed? It's like an appointment of something. You know, if we think something is important, we want to keep that date. Like if we make a doctor appointment and we don't want to get charged the fee for missing it, what do? Put it in your phone. Right? Who uses calendars anymore, right? I know. I'm one of the ones that actually prefer the paper, you know. I prefer to write it down. But, you know, you put it in your phone. You set an alarm. You do something to remind you of an appointment that you have. Guys, Shabbat is an appointment you have every week. It's a time that Yahweh put on his calendar to say, this is what happens on this day. And here's the thing. It's going to happen with or without you. But don't you want to be a part of it? You know? So, these are the things. Moed is an appointed time. It is a set time. It is something that is set and established. You can't say, well, let's see. So this week we got Shabbat, and then, well, I'm busy next Shabbat, so let's kind of make Shabbat on Wednesday. Not going to fly. You know? It's one day that was established. Even the days of the week in Hebrew, it's not like, you know, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. In Hebrew, it's not like that. In Hebrew, it's like Yom Rishon. That's day one. Day one. And then Yom Sheni, that's day 2. Yom Shlishi, that's day 3. Right? So literally, this is how they all go through. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and Shabbat. So what day is Shabbat? How about the day that's named it? Think about it. So, what happens in here? What goes on in these times? They are appointed times, and what else? They are holy convocations. So they're set times, and they are holy convocations. The word for convocation is mikra, which is from the word kara, which means to call out. Same word we get vayikra for. Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. Vayikra is when Yahweh calls out to tell the people of Israel how to draw closer to him. Okay? So mikra, it's a holy convocation, and it is a public gathering. It's also called a rehearsal. Why are we rehearsing? Because ain't none of us got it perfect. But we're trying. We're going to keep rehearsing. And then one day when he returns and gathers us all together, we'll get it right. Because he's the one who's going to tell us how to do it. Okay? In the meantime, we're rehearsing. Okay? If you have a wedding, you have a what the day before? A rehearsal. Why? Because come the day of the wedding, if you didn't do the rehearsal, you don't know what's going to happen. Right? And I don't think, nobody wants that. So these are rehearsals. Times for us to, what are we rehearsing though? Oh, see, that's another thing. What are we rehearsing? What are we trying to do? Well, again, public meetings called out, and there's readings that are done then. Well, what does Scripture tell us? When we gather on Shabbat, you're supposed to hear the word of Yahweh. And again, we'll get to that in a minute. All right. So who does Shabbat belong to? We kind of addressed this in Leviticus 23:1. These are the designated times of who? Adonai, the designated times of Yahweh. These are my designated times. So one of the things we see here, Shabbat observance. How do we observe Shabbat? Well, here's the thing. Shabbat was never meant to weigh you down. Shabbat was meant to be a place of covenant extension for you. Because I am in covenant with Yahweh, there's joy here. There's things that are benefits of covenant and all these things that we're going to see coming into him. So Shabbat, it's a time for good. It is a time for rest, a time to stop the work and enjoy the result of your work. It is a time to do that. A time to be with family, a time to be with Yahweh, a time to gather in with his people. This is what it's for. Then it is a time for healing. This is a time for healing as well. This is also a time for restoration, and this is a time for connection, among many other things. These are some things Shabbat is given to us for. All right, so we'll address some of these things as we kind of go on and along here today. One of the things we're supposed to do with the people is to gather with the assembly. Now, I know it looks different today than it did back then. You know, a lot of people say, well, Shabbat, you're supposed to just like stay home. You're supposed to stay there. Well, one of the things we don't think about here, when Israel was camped at Mount Sinai and it was Shabbat, where were they? In the camp. It's like, here they are. They're in the midst of the tabernacle. They're all gathered. They're all in the camp. They weren't spread out all over the land yet. They were in the camp. They were together with the tabernacle right in the middle of them. So essentially, what are they doing? They're still gathered around the tabernacle at this point, right? So here they are, they're doing that. So that's something we need to keep in mind. We're gathering around the presence of Yahweh and those whom he dwells with. Now, I know a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people don't have access to that. And I'm not trying to speak down to anybody who doesn't have that. My prayer for you is that you find it because it's necessary. It's needed, especially in nowadays, because we have so many people in life trying to cut each other off from lives among themselves when Scripture tells us we're supposed to be a people together. And we can't be a people gathered together to profess the name of Yahweh and how good and how great he is if we can't get along with anybody and hide all the time. We have to learn to be together, okay? So, gathering together with the assembly. They're holy convocations. So what does convocation mean? It is a public assembly. So, even today, they have public assemblies. Is that like hiding away? Well, COVID kind of changed all that, doesn't it? Now everybody does everything virtually and online, but that's not the same as having connection with the people of Yahweh, okay? And then Acts 15, 19 to 21, the Talmudim of Yeshua, these are ones who spent time with Yeshua, right? These are ones who you would think would know what Yeshua would want for his people, right? What did they say when they were posed with the question, what are we going to do with these people who are new to faith, who don't know how to serve Yahweh? They're coming from the nations. What are we going to do with them? Because they want to serve Yahweh, they don't know how, and man, they're causing a ruckus. So the disciples said, the disciples of Yeshua, the ones who would have known where to start, right? What did they say? Well, it says, so abstain from the pollutions of idols, fornication, things strangled, and from blood. These were things, issues of idolatry, adultery, some issues of kosher involved in there as well. These four things are the place where we start when we come to Yahweh. And then there's that fifth thing that nobody ever talks about. What does it say? For Moses of old time has in every city them that preach being read in the synagogues every Shabbat. What he's saying is, go to the synagogue on Shabbat to hear the Torah, to hear it experienced. And it's not just hearing the Torah, because guys, now online, we can listen to anything we want, right? But it's not the same as being with people and being together in that and to experience that. And let me put it to you this way too. Being around a bunch of people and being around your family from Yahweh, it helps perfect you. It helps better you. You want to know why? Because it makes you practice what you preach. You get opportunities to forgive one another. You get opportunities to learn how to dwell in unity. Are you going to choose to do so? See? And this is all matters of how we live with one another. All right, moving on. What else do we do? So we're supposed to gather. We're supposed to cease working. We're supposed to stop working. Guys, when I first came to the realization of Shabbat is relevant for me and it's healthy for me and these are things that can benefit me and my family, it was horrible. I know that, what? Horrible? Yeah, it was horrible. It was horrible for me, horrible for my wife. Don't ask her. Well, how so? Because I worked a lot, all the time. When I wasn't working, you know what I was doing? Working. And then when I wasn't working, I was studying. And the sleep was in there somewhere. Didn't get much of that. But when it came time, it was like, okay, stop. Just stop. I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I got to do something. What do I do? It drove me nuts. And because it drove me nuts, it drove her nuts. You know, she's like, so what do we do? We need to learn how the Father, wants us to rest and recuperate from the week and to do these things, but we need to learn how to switch that into helping to build and develop that relationship with Him and each other. That's what we're supposed to do. All right. Let's look at a few scriptures regarding this. I didn't do Leviticus 23. So Leviticus 23:3, work is to be done on how many days? 6 days. And the seventh day is Shabbat of complete rest, holy convocation. You are not to do any kind of work. It is a Shabbat for Adonai, even in your homes. It's like, well, nobody can see me in my home. I can clean it. Why would you want to? It's Shabbat. Stop. Clean it at sundown. Just let it be there. Learn to do something else. Learn to switch gears for a minute. That's the kind of the idea is, Yahweh sees you. You're not hiding. He sees you. It's Shabbat. Stop. And you see, this is a double-sided thing because it says work is to be done on 6 days. You know what that means? On 6 days, you do what? You work. So you work 6 days. But on the seventh is Shabbat. It's a rest. You stop working. See, there's the balance in there, right? Okay, moving on. Jeremiah 17:22. It says, don't carry a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, neither do any work, but hallow, make the Sabbath holy, as I commanded your fathers. Jeremiah 17:24. And it shall come to pass, if you diligently hearken unto me, says Yahweh, to bring no burden through the gates of the city on the Shabbat, but hallow the Shabbat day, to do no work therein. Again, to stop the working, stop doing these things. Just turn our attentions to Yahweh. Because a lot of times, especially in America, we're so me-minded, aren't we? Everything is about myself. What makes me feel good? What makes me do these things? Even down to Shabbat. Well, how I like to rest, can I be blunt? I don't care. Well, my Sabbath doesn't exist. It's not your Sabbath, it's His. That doesn't mean you can't take a break. Doesn't mean you can't have a vacation. Doesn't mean you can't do the things you enjoy. But don't call it what it's not. Well, my Shabbat, it's His Shabbat. If you want to take a break, take a break. You want to go work in the garden because it relaxes you, do it. But that's not Shabbat. So call it what it is. Moving on. Where was Yeshua on Shabbat? See, here's the thing, and a lot of people draw the connection. So the idea of, well, no, see, Yeshua is our example. And so, he didn't say we had to keep all these Old Testament things. But guys, read about the stories. He upheld them in his life. Everything he did was a result, and you can find the stuff he did in the Torah. He testified of these things. Not to mention, guys, if he would have at all departed from the Torah, then that would disqualify him from being the Messiah. So he couldn't do that. In order to be considered the Messiah, he had to uphold the Torah. Because according to Deuteronomy 13, he would have been a false prophet if he didn't. So, what did Yeshua do? And these are the things, guys. We want to do the things Yeshua did, right? Isn't he our perfect and ultimate example? Yes. And when we think about the things Yeshua did, we always think of the big things, the signs, the wonders, the miracles. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? But we forget the other things. So let's look at them. A couple things here. Mark 1:21. So they entered Capernaum, that's Capernaum, on Shabbat. They went to the synagogue and began teaching. Mark 6:2, when the Sabbath day was come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished, saying, from whence this man come these things? Okay. Luke 4:16, and he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and look at this, very interesting phrase that didn't have to be in there, but it's in there. And as his custom was, does that say that? Yep, it says that. He went to the synagogue on Shabbat, and he stood up to read. Luke 4:31, he came to Capernaum, city of Galilee, and he taught them on the Sabbath. Again, where was Yeshua in the Sabbath? We have testimony that on the Sabbath, he was in the synagogues. That doesn't mean that he was not out in the fields. It doesn't mean that he was not talking to people outside of these other places. But we have the testimony he was in the synagogue on Shabbat. And then we have that other thing. It says, as his custom was. That means it was not a freak accident. He did this all the time. This was what he did, okay? All right. Moving on a few other scriptures. Luke 6:6 came to pass on another Shabbat. He entered the synagogue and he taught, and there was a man whose right hand was withered. Luke 13:10, teaching one of the synagogues on Shabbat. Even what the Talmudim and the disciples, right? We have Shaul, Acts 13:14. Well, when Shaul and his companions departed Perga, they came to Antioch Pisidia, and they went into the synagogue on what day? On Shabbat, yeah, and they went. And so Acts 13:44. And on the next Shabbat, they came almost the whole city together to hear the word of God. Well, they could do that any day of the week. You're right, they could do that any day of the week, but they were working. So on Shabbat, they would come together and do that. And they were so excited, they got the whole city together on Shabbat to do that. Can you imagine some kind of revival having Tampa Bay, the whole city of Tampa Bay, come together on Shabbat? Boy, that would shut down the city, wouldn't it? Yeah, that'd be awesome. Okay, Luke 13, I lost my place. So Acts 15:21, again, we just addressed what we just said earlier with Yeshua's disciples. James is the one speaking, the half-brother of Yeshua, if you want to put it that way. And he says these 4 things then to go to the synagogue on Shabbat to hear the Torah taught. Why? Because we don't know it. And we can read it on our own and we can do things, but guys, we don't understand everything. And so we need to get together. We need to talk about it. We need to express some things that we've seen and that we've heard. And further, we need people to be trained in the Torah, to be trained in the word of Yahweh. Even Nehemiah, when they got people back together and they discovered the scrolls and they found them, they started reading them. They had Levites in with all the people so they could explain what they were hearing. How many of you guys read the Bible and you read it and you stand back and you're like, what? Especially in the book of Numbers, right? Yeah. Chronicles? Yeah. Got a lot on that one, right? You need someone to explain what you're reading, right? Well, that's where building the community and working together is to do all of these things. And then Acts 18:4, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Shabbat and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. By the way, in the synagogue on Shabbat, and the Jews and the Greeks. So it wasn't just the Jews there, okay? So even this, during the construction of the Mishkan, Mishkan was the tabernacle. Shechan is the dwelling presence of Yahweh, okay? Shechan is to dwell. So Mishkan is a place where Yahweh dwells, all right? So even in the building of the Mishkan, as important as that is, matter of fact, it was commanded by Yahweh. I want you to build a place for me to dwell with you. So God commanded them to build the tabernacle. But as important as that was, he said, when Shabbat comes, stop. I mean, this is a time when the people of Israel were excited about the presence of Yahweh. They hadn't grumbled so much yet. They had just been brought through. Here they are. They've just been redeemed. They brought, all these things are happening. And Yahweh says, build a place for me to dwell. And they're excited about it. So they want to get this project underway and get it over with. But when Shabbat comes, stop. Let me put it in this way. Don't get so caught up in what you're doing that you forget why you're doing it. Because this is what Yahweh tells us. It's not about building the place for him. It's about being the place for him. And so that's important. And one is an extension of the other. Okay? So that's what we're looking at. So Moshe assembled the whole people together. He said, these are the things Adonai has ordered you to do. What are they? Okay. On 6 days, what? Work is to be done. So, kind of interesting. I freed you, I redeemed you, I brought them out of Mitzrayim. You're not going to serve them anymore. You're not going to be servants anymore. And you're free. This is awesome. I'm going to show you my ways. I'm going to give you my spirit. Let's start a building project. Doesn't seem to fit, does it? But what was the purpose? Because in the building and the model of the tabernacle, he's showing us how he wants to dwell with us and how we're to dwell in him. So, again, covenant relationships and how these things work. So here, 6 days work is to be done. But in the 7th day is holy day for you, a Shabbat of complete rest in honor of Adonai. In honor of who? So let me ask you a question. Leviticus 23, we see Yahweh saying, these are my Shabbats. We see he established it at the beginning of creation. We see here it says, you're doing this in honor of him. So where in this does it say, if you want to keep Shabbat, you're being legalistic and trying to work your own salvation? It don't say that. It says they belong to him. They're in honor of him. He established it. Matter of fact, he blessed it. Why wouldn't we want to be involved in that which he blesses? And if he sets it apart, we want to set it apart because he set you apart too. Right? And all these things that he set apart should be together. It's not like, and I set you apart over here, I set you apart over there, and I set you apart over there. He sets us apart as a people that is one. Okay. So, building the Mishkan was important. But as important as that was, they were not to defile Shabbat, even to build the Mishkan. All right? Here's something interesting about that whole scenario. Priestly service was permissible. Guys, the priestly service was work. If you think about and you read about, so they come and they worship and they bring an offering that goes on the altar, this was work. And doing the incense in the morning and the cleaning the implements and cleaning the menorah, relighting the flames, doing all of it, that was work. But for the priests, it was permissible to do so. Look, what was the priestly service? I'm going to grossly understate it, okay? Facilitating worship. The things that were involved in facilitating worship were permissible. So what are the things that the priests do? Think about the things that the priests did. And matter of fact, on Shabbat, there was double the offerings that were given in the morning and the evening. So again, there was a lot more work on Shabbat. Things that had to be done. If you brought your offering, you're coming to worship, but the priest that takes it from the altar and goes up there on the altar, think about how hot that altar is. He's got to put it up there. And he's got to make sure it works and it's good and it does what it's supposed to do, right? So what was the priestly service? I'm going to tell you these things in here. The priestly service is not working your job. The priestly service is not going out to eat or washing the car. That's not priestly service. What were the things involving priestly service? Facilitating worship, making worship possible for the people. Okay? These are the things that were given. And they all ceased to work. And kind of put it to you this way, even the priests and the Levites, do you get a day off from serving Yahweh? No, they didn't. No, they didn't. This is kind of one of the few professions in the earth where you don't retire. It just doesn't happen. All right. So what else goes on? The priestly duties in the Mishkan was work, and it was very physical. It was very physical. That's why for most of the priests, they were aged 20 to 50. At the age of 50, they stopped a lot of the physical labor. They became more involved in a lot of the advisory and the music and different things like that. Okay? So it's more like they didn't have to do a lot of the physical work, but they were still in work, still in the process. But they were blameless because their work was facilitating worship. Teaching, preaching, the sacrifices, cooking, singing, dancing, performing on musical instruments, even security. There was security in the temple and the tabernacle as well, because they had to guard and watch over the sanctity of the holy things to make sure that someone didn't bring defilement there. Okay, that's what Pinchas was doing, guys. All right? Okay. So in regard to Shabbat, there's two reckonings of the Ten Commandments, right? Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy, which we see in Exodus 20, verse 8. Guard Shabbat to keep it holy, which we see in Deuteronomy 5. The question is, do these contradict? No, they don't really contradict. It's just telling us different things to handle on here, okay? They don't. So which is it? It's both. Okay, how's this? We remember by doing what? Guarding it. And we guard it by what? Kind of in a circle, right? But that's the way it works. Traditionally, it's taught as a positive and negative commandment. You shall and you shall not. So remember means what you do. And guard means what you do not do. So remember it, you remember it by doing it. Kind of like the word to remember something in Hebrew doesn't just mean I brought it to memory, like a memorial. It means you remembered it, and so you act on that which you remember to establish something. It's a memorial when you remember it, and you do something because of it. Okay, there's something there that's given to other people as well. So what do? So one of the things we do, we guard what we do on that day. We're protecting what we do on that day and guarding what we don't do on that day. If all of a sudden I'm like, oh, hey, you know what? I would really love to get some of that barbecue at that new place down the road. Wait till tomorrow. Because I got to eat. Yeah, you do. That's why you got food at your house. It's not a life or death scenario that you go out to eat today. You got food. Do that. And again, this is another issue of crucifying the flesh. The old things die. The old things need to go away, Let's look at a few things. So Scripture tells us don't work, but I kind of have to put this in there too. As a testimony of my covenant and place and position with Yahweh, he says don't work. Why would I want to make somebody else work? Does that make sense? Why would I want to make somebody else work on my behalf? This is one of the issues. And again, I'm telling you this in the aspect of this is me. I don't go out to eat on Shabbat. I don't like to do so because I am making someone work for me. And you're like, well, they're there working anyway. Not for me, they're not. They're doing that because they live in the world and they don't honor Shabbat and they do the things that are out there. But the minute I go out there and do things, then I am causing someone to work on my behalf. And guess what, guys? They're getting paid to do so. So, yeah, you don't work, but don't make others do it too, okay? Now, on this, I do understand, guys, we're not in Babylon, okay? We're in America, but America is by no means honoring many of the covenants with Yahweh, all right? So in that, I understand there are some people who can't get Shabbat off. Do what you need to with that. I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for saying that. Be persistent in your relationship and your covenant with Yahweh, but seek Him in the midst of all of it, because I've seen it change. I've seen it change, where Yahweh put it on the boss's heart to do it, and not a godly person either. And keep this in mind as well, which we'll get to this in a minute. The preservation of life is always important. It's not like, oh, you're dying? Well, it's Shabbat, so I can't call 911. Some people go to that extreme. Preservation of life is always there and is always important. First responders work, guys, because life's got to be saved, okay? So don't become legalistic in your observance where you can't let life happen. You miss the point if that's the case, okay? But going out for barbecue ain't life and death. You get my point. It's funny because a lot of times when I teach some things, I have to put so many disclaimers out there, and I always get something, well, you didn't say this. It's like, you're right, I didn't, but let me clarify it. Anyway, all right, so cease causing others to work. Deuteronomy 5, 13 to 15 says you have 6 days of labor to do your work, but the seventh day is Shabbat, and it says on it you are not doing any kind of work, not you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave. This could even be translated today as someone you employ in service, okay? Your donkey or any layer or any other livestock, or even the foreigner staying with you. Well, they're not in covenant. I can make them work. How many of you heard the term Sabbath goy? Yeah, if you don't know what that is, see me. I'll tell you what it is. I don't think it's right, by the way. Anyway. So even the foreigner staying within you, well, they don't keep Shabbat. Why do I have to make? Because it is a testimony of God's presence in your life. They'll see that when they're around you, Okay. Verse 15, you were to remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God, who brought you out there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Adonai your God has ordered you to keep the day of Shabbat. Because Yahweh redeemed you and set you free, this is why you keep Shabbat. Because He's redeemed you. Because He set you free. Because you belong to Him. That's why. Not because I'm trying to get something from Him or I'm trying to earn anything from Him. No, you belong to Him, so you're learning to walk with Him. You're learning to be where He is. He put an appointment on the calendar. He wants to meet with you today. Are you going to stand Him up? Well, we can meet with Him every day of the week. You're right, do you? And even if you did, it wouldn't change Shabbat. See? Nehemiah 10:31. So if the people of the lands bring merchandise or food to sell on Shabbat, we will not buy from them on Shabbat or on a holy day. We will forego planting the harvesting our fields during the seventh year and collecting debts then. So again, it's just a testimony from Nehemiah saying, we're not going to do this thing on Shabbat. On Shabbat, let's stop all the commerce, let's stop all the things, and let's get back in the Word, get back in the Torah, get back in the relationship, do these things He's telling us to do. So what happens here? So when the gates of Jerusalem began to grow dark before Shabbat, I ordered that the doors be shut, and I ordered they not be reopened until after Shabbat, and I put some of my servants in charge of the gates, and see to it that no loads be brought in on Shabbat. And the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of goods spent the night outside Jerusalem once or twice. They're saying, so when Shabbat comes, the gates of the city, we're going to shut the gates of the city and not let the merchants in. It's Shabbat. You ain't getting in here to sell your stuff today. What'd they do? They camped outside the gates. Okay, so what's going to happen if you're camped outside the gates? You're going to have people who are going, they out there? And go out there. So what does he do? Verse 21. So I warned them, why are you spending the night by the wall? Do it again and I'll use force against you. And then they stopped. Again, guarding the sanctity of the holy things was the job of the people of Yahweh. It's like working in the tabernacle, making sure it was undefiled. Those guarding the altar, making sure it was undefiled. And Shabbat is a set time that Yahweh said is holy. Are we guarding it in our lives so that we don't bring defilement onto the time? Okay? So what do? We don't force others to work. How about seeking your own pleasure? That's what I addressed before, You know what really relaxes me? NASCAR. I think I'm going to spend Shabbat. I'm going to go over to Daytona. That's not what Shabbat's for, guys. Not at all, okay? What does it say? Isaiah 58:13. So if you hold back your foot on Shabbat from pursuing what? Your own interests, On my holy day, on his holy day. This is what he said it was. If you call Shabbat a delight, the only way you can call Shabbat a delight is if you actually delight in it. Be like, yay, it's Shabbat. This is Shabbat. Or is it like, it's Shabbat? What is it? Right? So, how do we do that? Then, so Adonai's holy day, honoring, then honor it by not doing your usual things, pursuing your interests, or speaking about them. If you do, you will find delight in Adonai. That's how you find delight in Shabbat. By not being distracted by all the things that distract you the rest of the week. By not allowing these things to hinder what he wants to do with you. It's kind of like, Yahweh, how come I never hear your voice anymore? How often are you tuned into it? The hindrances, the distractions, the things that keep us away from like spending time with him, getting in the word and just sitting there with him. Just being that. Do we spend time doing that? That's what he's called us to do. When we find delight in Yahweh, we'll find delight in Shabbat because that's what he set it aside, to build relationship with him and with each other. So Shabbat is also a what? A sign. Rest area ahead. If you're on a long journey and you see the sign, rest area, what do? You stop. Why? Because you got to get off the road for a minute. Why? You're just sitting down. What are you doing? Guys, you go on a long drive? Yeah, it can be rough on you. Rest area. I need to get off. I need to get off the road for a minute and change my focus. I need to get off the road for a minute and change what I'm doing and being involved in here. So Shabbat is that as well. Okay, moving on. Exodus 31:13. Speak to the children of Israel and say, my Shabbats you shall keep, because it is a what? It is a sign between who? Me and you. So Shabbat is a sign. What is a sign for? In the scriptures, the word for sign is used for many things. One of the word for sign, ot, means something that proves something or points to something else. Right? Driving down the freeway, you see a sign. You don't want the sign. You don't want to stop at the sign, but the sign is giving you information to go somewhere else to do something else or whatever, right? Shabbat is a sign. It's a sign that you don't belong to you. You belong to him. You belong to somebody else. Much like a wedding ring is a sign when you're in marriage, wedding ring is a sign that you don't belong to you. You belong to somebody else, right? The Shabbat is a sign for us as well. Okay, so keep this as a sign between me and you. Between who? Me and you, right? That you may know. So it is a sign between me and you that you may know what? That I am Yahweh, that I am the Lord, who does what? Who sanctifies you. It is not you who sanctify you. It is him who sanctifies you. It is him who sets you apart. It is him who makes you clean. It is he who redeems you. It is he who restores you and brings you to himself. And he is the one who draws you to him, especially in certain times and seasons. Shabbat is a sign that he sets you apart. I sanctify you. So you don't do Shabbat to say, in my own way, in my own strength kind of a thing. You do it as an acknowledgement. You don't belong to you. It's because of a covenant relationship between you and your God, and he sets you apart. And buddy, it sets you apart, doesn't it? It's like one of the first things, as soon as you tell somebody anything about the Torah, there's generally, most often, two things that people go off on. It's Shabbat and food. Isn't it? See, and there's other things too, but that's the majority. Shabbat and food. Why? Idols and idols. Okay? So again, we've got to learn how the Father wants to define these things in our life. So moving on to verse 17, it is a sign between me and you and the children of Israel forever, for in 6 days Yahweh made the heaven and earth. On the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Ezekiel 20, 10-13 says, so I led them out of Egypt into the desert. I gave them my commands and I taught them my laws, which bring life to anyone who obeys them. It's not the way you've heard that, is it? You've heard that, people say, well, no, the New Testament, you keep the commands and you die because of keeping the commands, right? No. I gave them my commands and taught them my laws, which bring life to anyone who obeys them. Consider this. Someone came to Yeshua and says, how do I have life? And he says, keep the commands. That'll go against a lot of church doctrine, won't it? But what does he say? Verse 21. I made keeping Shabbat a sign of agreement between us to remind them that I, Yahweh, make them holy. See that? It is a sign that he makes you holy. He sanctifies you. He sets you apart. The purpose was to remember you don't make you holy. Yahweh makes you holy. Okay? It is an acknowledgement I don't serve me. I serve him. Even if I got to paraphrase it this way, I serve me 6 days a week. That seventh day, I'm serving Yahweh. Shouldn't be that way, but a lot of people live that way, okay? So, next, verse 13. Even in the desert, they defied me. They broke my laws, rejected my commands, which bring life to anyone who obeys them. They completely profaned Shabbat. Going on, chapter 20, verse 18. Instead, I warned the young people among them, do not keep the laws of your ancestors made. He didn't say, don't keep the laws I made. Notice the difference? Don't keep the laws your ancestors made. And do not follow their customs or defile yourselves with their idols. I am Yahweh your God. Obey my laws and my commands. Make the Shabbat a holy day so that it will be a sign of covenant that we made, and it will remind you I am Yahweh your God. See that? When the world is doing all these other things, and then when the world is loud and giving a lot of voices on how you're supposed to live your life, but Yahweh is saying, don't listen to all those things. Listen to me, my words. Listen to these things. And then he says, Shabbat, it will remind you I am Yahweh your God. Shabbat reminds you he is our God. I don't serve me. I don't have an idol, which a lot of people do. A lot of people create this idol and call it Yahweh. I'm going to live my life the way I want. I'm a good person. I can do what I want. And then I'm going to put the name Yahweh on it, and he's going to be okay with it. Not true. We make golden calves. That's not what we're supposed to do. Here he says, to remind you, I am Yahweh your God. One of the things I love when you're reading through the Torah, there's so many places where it says, I am Yahweh your God. And you ever notice that whenever he says, I am Yahweh your God, it's right before or right after something that we don't want to hear? Isn't that awesome? It's right before something we're like, well, or like, well, I don't see it that way. It's kind of irrelevant. It's the way he declared it. He says, I am Yahweh your God, to remind us he's our God, you're not. And if we belong to him, that means there are things in this world, the way the world tells us to do things and live, that's going to contradict what he says. When we're given those choices, what is our choice? Follow him. Follow him. Okay. So, the Mishkan, the Sabbath, is a sign and it is a sanctuary in time. The tabernacle was a sign and a sanctuary in space. Not like space, space, but like, in literal physical space in the earth, right? So here, Shabbat is a sanctuary in space. The tent of meeting is called Ohel Moed. The tent, Moed. Moed, again, what was Moed? An appointment, a meeting, a set time, something, a place to meet. The appointed times are called Moedim, including Shabbat. Both are given as specific appointments for Yahweh to meet with his people. He says, in the tabernacle, I will meet with you there. See, he lives everywhere, right? Yahweh is everywhere. But he said, I will meet with you there. In Shabbat, he says, I will meet with you there. You know? Look, let's draw a couple things here. We have Mishkan and the Shabbat. So Mishkan, for the tent of meeting, it is a holy place defined with limits and borders. You have the courtyard, the holy place, and the most holy place. There are boundaries to it, okay? The Mishkan was set to be holy and undefiled, and Israel was to prepare themselves before they entered it. Once you enter, you would expect to meet Yahweh because Yahweh said, I will meet with you there. For Shabbat, it's a holy time with defined borders. It is this day. You have coming into it, coming out of it. It has defined borders. And we are told to prepare ourselves for Shabbat and keep it holy. Entering into Shabbat, those who do so can do so with an expectation of meeting Yahweh, because he says, I will meet with you there. All right? So being gathered together in worship, what are we doing? It is to be filled up to equip you to go into the world. We started off by saying, how many of you have had, man, it's only 3 more days to Shabbat. It's only 2 more days to Shabbat. It's only 1 more day, 12 hours and 46 minutes and 13 seconds to Shabbat. Not saying there's anything wrong with that. Honestly, looking forward to the expectation, that's great. We should look forward with an expectation, knowing that there is a defined place. The Father says he wants to meet with us and everything, and we're like, do that. But there is a little thing in there I want to challenge us to kind of change the way we think about some of this, though. Because some of this can lead us into the idea of, the destination fixation. What do I mean by that? If I could only get to that point, then life's going to be okay. If I could only do the next thing, then life is going to be okay. If I could only do this, this, and this, then life is going to be okay. And then we get there, and life's not okay. We're building within ourselves an expectation to be let down. Israel, 42 encampments in the wilderness. If I could just get to the next encampment, maybe we can make it into the land, right? Are we focusing on, if I could just do that? Or are we focusing on, if I could just trust Yahweh? Amen. The journey is the process. It's not about all the stops along the way. It's about the process of the journey. It's about living throughout all these things in the life of the journey and understanding this. When you meet with him, he says, I will meet with you and I will be found by you if you search for me with all of your heart. You will find me. Not a if, not a maybe. It's a promise. And so what happens when we rest? You get filled up. It fills you up. Your gas tank runs empty and you ain't going nowhere else till you put more gas in the tank. Right? That's what Shabbat does for you. But I want to encourage you to think what happens next. It goes beyond that. It's not just about if I could just make it to Shabbat to put some more gas in my tank. It's about now that Yahweh has filled you up, what's next? Now it's like, wow, I'm actually, think about it and consider it for a minute. I am equipped and ready to do what Yahweh's calling me to do in this week. I'm ready to face these challenges that life brings because Yahweh has filled me up. It's not about, I'm drained. Yay, Shabbat, I'm drained. Understand that when we meet him, he equips you for what lies ahead. It doesn't catch him by surprise. Acknowledge that in your life. Look at this. I want to put it this way. Are you just working so you can get to rest? Are you working from rest that you have been given to equip you? It's not about working to rest. Your life does not exist so you can just make it to one day retire. That's not what Yahweh's called you for. It's not how he's given you to live life. It's not like, I got to work hard all my life so one day I can retire and rest. And then they retire and rest. And what do? Get a job. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, by the way. I know my dad, when he retired from the Army, first thing he did was get a job. And he's been working. I don't think that man ever really fully retired. Anyway, I'm just saying that's the principle, isn't it? Well, in Shabbat, the idea we're thinking here is that Yahweh has brought you to this place. He's given you the rest. He's given you His Spirit. He's given you His Word. He's equipped you with everything that you need for tomorrow and the next day and the next day. Don't meet it with the expectation of it's going to knock you down. Meet it with the expectation of Yahweh is going to bring you through it and equip you to go to the next day and the next day and the next day for His glory, for His purposes, for what He has called you to do, because He has not called you to live life on the floor. Amen. He's called you to live life abundantly. So are you just working to get to rest, or are you working from the rest He has given you, acknowledging He has filled you up? Couple more things. We'll about another hour, we'll be done. I know I'm not going to keep you that long. A few more things I want to get over here, though. One, is Shabbat a burden? No. But it's amazing to see how many people, according to the things of God, they call a burden. It's kind of like Yeshua says, I made this great banquet, and I'm going to send my servants out to go invite all these people to the banquet. And I love how the scripture says it. And they responded with a chorus of excuses. If Yahweh set out a banquet for you, why wouldn't you want to be there? Amen. Guess what Shabbat is? It's a banquet that He has given to you. Literally, like even this, consider this. When you brought the offerings to Yahweh and you had them go and you put them like a peace offering, you put it on the altar was called the table of Yahweh. So when you brought a peace offering and it was put up there, you got portions of that back that you were supposed to eat. Peace offerings, fellowship offerings, Thanksgiving offerings. You were supposed to eat these. You were literally eating from the table of Yahweh. You were eating where He has prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Yahweh wants fellowship and relationship with me. Who do I need to be afraid of? What do I need to fear? Right? Is Shabbat a burden? No. But boy, some people make it so, don't they? It's not supposed to be that way. Let's look at a couple things here. Matthew 12. So one Shabbat during the time Yeshua was walking through some wheat fields and his talmidim were hungry, and they began picking the heads of grain and eating them. On seeing this, the Pharisees said, "Look, your talmidim are violating Shabbat." And He said to them, "Haven't you ever read when David, when those are..." Okay, first off, there's no real, they didn't profane Shabbat here. There's no real violation, all right? You're not supposed to harvest. Go out and like you're running the thresher and you're doing things and, they're not doing that. You know what they're doing? Boy, that's so hard. That's not work. You got to eat. So that wasn't the issue. That wasn't the point. Okay? And Yeshua kind of called them out on that. And he addressed them and where they were coming from in that. He didn't say, "Oh, there's no violation here." He met them when their mindset and met them where they were talking from. All right? Verse 4. So He said, haven't you ever heard what David did when they were hungry, right? So He said, he entered the house of God and he ate the bread of the presence, which was prohibited both to him and his companions. It is permitted only to the Kohanim. Or haven't you read in the Torah that on Shabbat or Kohanim profane Shabbat yet are blameless? And I tell you, in this place, something is greater than in the temple. So how could the priests profane Shabbat, but they're blameless? Well, we already addressed that because they were doing the things they needed to facilitate worship and to do those things, right? They were working, but yet they were blameless in profaning Shabbat because it was allowing people to worship. So they got that. And that's what was going on with David. The one whom Yahweh had anointed, who was running for his life. So what? They come to the priest saying, the one who's anointed to be your king is going to die. Nope. Can't feed you nothing. Go along. No, all I got's this bread, but I'll give it to you. Right? Again, keeping the greater issues here, right? So, Matthew 12, verse 7. So if you knew what I want, compassion rather than animal sacrifice meant, you would not condemn the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Shabbat. How many of you heard that? But Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. So that means we don't have to keep it. That makes no sense. That makes no sense at all whatsoever. Okay? It doesn't mean he changed his mind regarding Shabbat. It doesn't mean he changed his mind on how to walk with him. It doesn't mean he changed his covenants. Matter of fact, Scripture says, "I am Yahweh, I change not." We see in Scripture where it says Yeshua, he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, always, all time, right? He doesn't change, right? Okay, so does this mean that he changed his mind? Or does it mean we don't get it? I would rather go with that one. There are some things we just don't understand, or our explanation or understanding of some things may be a little off, and we just need to spend some time just being with him, you know? All right, Hebrews 4, 1 through 11. Therefore, let us fear lest perhaps a promise having been left to enter the rest, any of you may come short. For indeed we have the gospel preached to us, even as they also, but the word did not profit those hearing it, as they have been mixed with faith in the ones who heard. For the ones who are believing, enter this rest. But even as he said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. So the works that come from being the foundations of the world. For he's spoken somewhere about the seventh day. In this way, God rested from all the works on the seventh day. What he's saying here is like, so we've had the gospel preached to us, as they did even in the beginning, but like talking to the ones in the wilderness, it says the word that they heard did not benefit them because they didn't have the faith to receive it. You ever been in a place where the word of God doesn't do you any good? Because you just don't believe it. We need to receive the word with the faith that Yahweh means what he says. And because he means what he says, that means we're going to change. Right? We're going to do things different when he's called us to do that. Okay? So verse 5, and this again, I shall not enter into my rest, which is quoting Psalm 95:11 as well. So therefore, since it remains for some to enter into it, and those who formerly had the gospel preached did not enter in on account of disobedience, he again marks out a certain day, saying, in David the day, after a long time, according to what he has said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, quoting from Psalm 95:7 and 8. For if Joshua gave them rest, then he would not have afterwards spoken about another day. Verse 9, so then there remains what? A Sabbath rest for whom? For the Jewish people. What's it say? The people of God. You know what that means? Every tongue, every tribe, every nation. All who are called by his name. Okay? For he entering into his rest, he himself also rested from his works as God rested from his own. Therefore, let us exert ourselves to enter into that rest. It kind of sounds counterproductive, doesn't it? Work to enter into the rest. But that's what he's telling us to do, to guard it, to watch over it, protect it, and enter into these things. And so that anyone doesn't fall in disobedience. So, Shabbat is a holy day set apart to Yahweh, but it's set apart as a day for you. Shabbat was made for man. It was made for you. This is a gift that Yahweh gives you. Do we want to say, I don't want it? Look, Shabbat was made for man, but belongs to Yahweh. Leviticus 19:30 again, my Shabbats. Ezekiel 20:19 and 20, we just read that. My Shabbatot, my Shabbats. Leviticus 23:2, my Moedim. Verse 3 says Shabbat. Again, all of these, my Shabbat. Back to Matthew 12, verse 9. So going on from that place, he went into the synagogue, and a man there had a shriveled hand, and looking for a reason to accuse him of something, they asked him, is healing permitted on Shabbat? I want to point something out. They didn't say anything about you can't heal. They said, you can't heal on Shabbat. What in the world? Really? Of all days? Shouldn't today be a day to heal? Shouldn't today be the day to restore, to make whole? Isn't that what the day is for? So here, that's what he's getting at. It's interesting how you see some of the people, they didn't marvel at some of the miracles and things. They made accusations because of when it was. Even when the Holy Spirit was poured out and poured out on the Gentiles, it doesn't say that they were marveling because the Holy Spirit was poured out. They were marveling because it was poured out on the Gentiles. See? Again, the idea of, well, see, God will use us, but he won't use them. God will use whoever he chooses, for his plan, for his purposes. Right? Okay, going on. But he answered, verse 11, if you have a sheep that falls in the pit on Shabbat, which of you won't take a hold and lift it out? If you have a sheep that falls in the pit on Shabbat, you're going to say, sorry. Oh, you're going to get it out. It's going to jump back in, but you're going to get it out, right? Verse 12, how much more valuable is a man than sheep? Therefore, what is permitted on Shabbat to do good? So then to the man he said, hold out your hand, he said, and he held it out, and he became restored as sound as the other one. That's the idea. This is our example. This is Yeshua. He didn't profane Shabbat. He showed us the deeper message. That's what it's for, to do good, to help build each other up, to help be around one another, to help each other grow, to point life in the Word, to help encourage one another to go out to do what we're supposed to be doing in the world. So, when there was a need, mercy was the rule. That was it. When there was a need, mercy was the rule. To do good is the preservation of life is always what the Father desires. Yahweh doesn't desire the death of his people. He desires the life of his people. And that's what he's calling us to, his life. Closing, Shabbat is a blessing. It is. I know you don't believe me now, but it is. It all comes down to what's your focus. How you approach something affects what you receive from it. What's your focus going into Shabbat? Is it a joy? Is it a time you're looking forward to? Or is it a burden? How you go into it affects what you get out of it. Same thing with reading the Word of Yahweh. If you just want a history book, that's all you're going to get. But if you receive it mixed with faith, it produces life. Right? Shabbat is a joy. It is a blessing. Isaiah 56, thus says Yahweh, keep judgment, do justice, my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that does this. Blessed is the man that does what? And the Son of Man who lays hold of it. Lays hold of what? What's it say? That keeps the Shabbat from polluting it and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Go down to verse 6. And also the sons of the stranger, someone who's not naturally born Israel, the sons of a stranger, and join themselves to Yahweh, to serve him, to love the name of Yahweh, to be his servants, everyone that keeps Shabbat from polluting it and takes hold of my covenant. Even them I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted on my altar. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. Where have we heard that before? Isn't that what Yeshua quoted? That his desire, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people? Do you ever know that the context of that being given in the scriptures was in context of no matter where you came from, no matter what nation, no matter what people, you turn to a place of covenant relationship with him and keep Shabbat and come and worship him? He says he'll receive you? That's the context. My house should be a house of prayer for all nations, a place where we can meet together and worship the one true God. No matter where you came from, in him, we're one people, right? Isaiah 58, 13 and 14, last here. Keep Shabbat holy. Don't pursue your own interest on that day, but enjoy the Sabbath and speak of it with delight as Yahweh's holy day. Honor Shabbat in everything you do on that day, and don't follow your own desires or talk idly. Then Yahweh will be your delight. How do we delight in Yahweh? He just told us. Where is our focus? What do we think about? What are we doing? These are the issues. Yahweh will be your delight, and I will give you great honor and satisfy you with the inheritance that I have promised to your ancestors Yaakov, for I, Yahweh, have spoken. We want the promises that Yahweh has given to us, the covenant relationship with him, yes. Then we need to learn to walk with him in these things. Just step by step, guys. And here's another thing. We keep it perfect? No. But our desire is to learn. And as we learn, we change. You know, none of us are perfect. As you spend one day with a group of people and ain't nobody perfect, right? But what do we do? What do we do then? We change. We grow. We help each other. We don't dismiss each other and count each other out. We help each other. And someday, he's going to return and bring us all together in the kingdom. Until then, we got to live here, but let's do it with our focus being on him.